Welcome everyone to History Gone Wilder, part of Half History Will Travel. I am your host, the Wilder Historian, and after the death of Stonewall Jackson, Hill became a corps commander. He wouldn't have time to adjust to so much responsibility before another campaign was underway. Lee planned to invade the North once again. Hill needed to adjust the command structure in the new 3rd Corps. Each corps would have 3 divisions. Naturally, the Light Division would be included in Hill's corps, but who would lead it? Hill helped make the division famous throughout the Confederacy and the Union, so its successor needed to exemplify similar qualities and possess the respect of the men. Hill was torn between 2 candidates. Henry Heath was senior to the other brigadiers in rank and proved himself a capable commander. However, Dorsey Pender entered the Light Division from its inception and climbed the ranks. Hill stated, "General Pender has fought with the division in every battle, has been 4 times wounded and never left the field, has risen by death and wounds from 5th Brigadier to its senior, has the best drilled and disciplined brigade in the division, and more than all possesses the unbound confidence of the division." He suggested taking 2 brigades from the Light Division, Archer and Heath's, and combining them with 2 other brigades to create a new division under Heath. Then what was left of the Light Division would be placed under Pender. Lee agreed to that compromise. Heath and Pender formed 2 of the 3 divisions in Hill's corps. The last division came from Longstreet's corps under Richard Anderson. Anderson's division contained a veteran force of 5 hard-fighting brigades that would perform good service for Hill. Heath commanded the most inexperienced and least reliable troops in the corps. Johnson Pettigrew's North Carolinians and Joseph Davis's Mississippi Brigade were new to the Army of Northern Virginia. Both were untested in combat, and Heath had only been with the Army for 3 months. He had served in the Western Theater before being transferred to the East. Powell Hill needed to handle this new corps carefully, with new troops and the fact that many of these brigades and divisions had never worked together. On June 3rd, Lee sent Longstreet and Ewell's corps to the west, leaving Hill at Fredericksburg to watch the Union forces and confuse them as to Lee's intentions. Lee gave Hill open instructions. If Hooker pushed across the river, Hill was to fall back along the railroad, but if Hooker disappeared, Hill was to pursue the enemy. Before Ewell's corps got out of sight, the Union opened up an artillery bombardment and began crossing the river. Lee stopped his columns, but by June 6th, Lee determined that the demonstrations had been simply a probe and not a major attack. Thus he continued his march to the west. Ewell and his corps entered the Shenandoah Valley and then would press on into Maryland and Pennsylvania, while Longstreet held a position around Culpeper to support Hill if Hooker pushed south. On June 13th, 10 days after Lee began his campaign, Hooker discovered the movement. Lee had stolen a march on the Union commander, and he pursued. Once all Union forces left his front, Hill marched his divisions west, heading up the valley and toward Pennsylvania. Longstreet brought up the rear. On their way up the valley, just north of Front Royal, Hill's men entered a clearing where a host of bats flew close to the ground. The men began swinging at the bats with sticks for sport. Hill and his staff dismounted and participated in the fun. On June 24th, Hill and Longstreet met at Lee's headquarters for a conference. A little boy named Layton Parks, whom Lee had met on the Maryland invasion the previous year, came to the tent with a bucket of raspberries as a present. Lee thanked him and invited him to stay for lunch. Lee sat the boy on his knee and played with the child as he would his own. The 2 corps commanders insisted that they also have the privilege to engage with the child, which Lee obliged. Longstreet, his family wiped out by yellow fever a year earlier, enjoyed his time with young Parks, but it then became time to discuss matters of war. Hill called for a horse to take the young man back home. Lee placed him in the saddle and said, "Give him time and he'll do for the cavalry yet." Heath's division, on orders from Hill, marched through Cashtown and toward the little town of Gettysburg, with orders to search the town for supplies, especially shoes, but sending such a large force on a 20-mile round-trip march without cavalry to a town through which Jubal Early's division had marched just a few days prior seemed foolhardy. On the morning of July 1st, Hill remained confined to a cot in excruciating pain from possibly a flare-up of his prostatitis. He admitted he was unwell all day. He directed Heath to not bring on a general engagement, but unbeknownst to them, this would erupt into the largest battle in North America. Heath's division became engaged with Union forces around the town of Gettysburg. Near Willoughby Run, many of Archer's brigade became prisoners, including Archer himself, as the Marylander marched to the rear of Union lines. One of his West Point classmates, Abner Doubleday, rode up and said, "Good morning, Archer. How are you? I am glad to see you." Archer fired back, "Well, I am not glad to see you." Doubleday turned into the saddle and told one of his staff to take the obstinate Confederate to the rear. As the fighting intensified, Hill remained at Cashtown, attempting to regain his strength. Lee rode into town and met with Hill, who could not give the Army commander any further information about what was happening at Gettysburg. Painfully, Hill mounted his horse and started eastward. Lee, Hill, and Heath met on a ridge near Willoughby Run, where Pegram's artillery was firing into the Union position. As they watched the duel, a Federal artillery shell exploded over the 16th North Carolina. A small shell fragment scraped the head of a captain in that regiment. Blood started to trickle down the man's head, and he ran to the rear yelling, "I'm dead, I'm dead." The colonel of the regiment yelled to two stretcher bearers, "Go and take that dead man off, if you can catch him." When Lee saw the Federal right flank beginning to crumble, he instructed Hill to send Heath and Pender into the engagement. The Federals began running through the town and took up positions on Cemetery Hill and Cemetery Ridge. Hill's men occupied Seminary Ridge. Hill achieved admirable accolades for the engagement on the first day of Gettysburg. Lee needed information about the enemy's whereabouts, and it was Hill that was tasked to do so with his infantry. His men found the Federal force at Gettysburg and engaged them, and with the help of General Ewell, drove them from the field. Although in great pain, Hill persevered and delivered a devastating blow to the blue columns. Sending such a large force on a reconnaissance mission seemed odd, but Hill's insistence on Heath and Pender advancing together allowed the Confederates to keep constant pressure on the Union and led to victory that day.